Oh, that's a great new feature by Zoom. So welcome everybody. Now we're live. And my name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And on the line today, all the way from Southern California and the US, I've got Mike Adams. Mike, you're the co-founder, or you're the founder of Grain, excuse me, which is an app that records, transcribes, and shares, at the moment, Zoom video call highlights, but in the future, all video call highlights. And basically, in a nutshell, what this does is you can caption and clip your video segments of choice. So we're going to dive into that, but let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Yeah, great to be here, Lisette. We have been a remote first team since the beginning of Grain. We're about 2 years old, about 15 people. And what remote work first looked like for us before COVID was about 50% virtual across many, many time zones, and then a 50% in San Francisco. And then COVID hit and we got rid of our office and we all went 100% remote. And now that is what we're going to do today. So as you mentioned, Southern California, I moved down there, and my co-founder is also my brother, and he moved down there, and I think he's gonna move somewhere else here soon. And our team is kind of all over the place now. And so we already had a remote first culture, to where what that meant for us was that every meeting had a video component. Even if you were not having a virtual participant, say it was 2 people in San Francisco, that was an opportunity to document information, knowledge, and it was as simple as just adding, as if we had a virtual participant on Zoom. We do it on Zoom anyway, hit the record button, and then make sure that that information got distributed to those who needed it. And so that's one of the unique aspects of remote work, of how we have done it from the very beginning. In fact, I've been recording every single one of my virtual calls for about 5 years. I started an online school it was 2016, and we did every single thing on Zoom. So our team meetings were on Zoom, our students' classroom sessions were on Zoom, and that's actually where the inspiration for starting the company came from. But everything else in terms of written documentation is in Slack and Notion. And Notion is a huge time saver for us. And then Slack is the default remote office, I think, for most teams.
Yeah, that's totally true. So I want to dive into Grain in a second, but since we're on the topic of how you went remote, I'd love to hear, what were some of the biggest challenges when COVID first hit, going from a partially remote team to a full remote team? What were some of the things you struggled with?
Yeah, I think that there's probably 2 things. One is quick serendipitous meetings, I think, become more challenging. But what that does in a good way is it forces you to be a little bit more intentional about, really does this need to actually be a meeting? And if so, who needs to be involved in it? And a lot of times we come to the conclusion that actually we can just hash this out over Slack, or sometimes things just kind of will evolve into a video call off of Slack when it gets too complicated. So that's been one challenge. And then the other challenge has been, I would just say, team bonding and friendship. It's really difficult to feel as interpersonally connected when everything is remote. And so I think even fully remote teams from the very beginning, we're now fully remote, but we were hybrid remote. We prioritized and would have regular in-persons, and that hasn't happened. But now that the vast majority of our team has been vaccinated, we're looking we're looking forward to being able to do that again. And that will be a really important part for just the interpersonal trust and dynamics of just feeling bonded as a team.
So you'll be remote most of the time, and every once in a while you'll get together in person to whatever it is, brainstorm, hang out, just be together. Indeed, there's really nothing better than hanging out over a big pile of nachos and a couple of beers in person. You can't replicate it online somehow.
Well, our in-person office, the best part of working was just getting lunch. More than anything else, it was just being able to go down to the taco truck and go to get some ramen noodles. And in fact, our office in San Francisco before the pandemic was a live-work apartment, where we had the ability for anybody, it was an open invitation on the team to come and to fly into San Francisco up to once a quarter and come and stay at the office and work with us in San Francisco for a week. So that just open invitation made people feel that much more included as well. And oftentimes our team would fly out from Toronto or fly up from Mexico or wherever they're living full time and come and hang out with us in San Francisco. And so when we go back, as things go back to normal, I don't think we're going to have any, in-person component, but I thought that was a pretty unique opportunity that we had, to be intentional pre-pandemic that might be of interest to people, as others are starting to create remote offices to where there's actually that ability to have an open invitation because you don't have the hotel costs. And it ends up actually being cheaper to do a live work. And we just worked out of the living room because we're a small team. This obviously doesn't work when you start to get to a certain team size, but it works really well when you're a small team.
Yeah, but it also might just spark something creative, like, oh, I never thought, like, maybe we get together. I mean, was on a team once that's fully remote, and when we got together, we just rented a huge Airbnb in Lisbon in Portugal, right? And then,
Yeah,
there was
totally.
10 of us, and then just, really a big one though, like everybody got their own bathrooms, and like,
Yeah.
luxury. But it really, it made all the difference in terms of team bonding, just being able to stay. So indeed, there's some new things that can be sparked from that.
We actually had, it was so sad. We had we'd had months of planning. We had that exact same scenario in Santa Cruz, just south of San Francisco. Huge Airbnb rented. Everybody had plane tickets booked and we're ready. And then the pandemic hit like a month before that. And so we're going to do our makeup. Maybe we'll do it in Portugal. I think that's a good idea.
It's a beautiful place, great food and great coffee, highly recommended. So Grain is an app that records, transcribes, and shares Zoom video call highlights. That's what it says on the website. Why did you create this? What was the pain that you're experiencing that made you say, like, I need this tool, I'm going to make it?
Yeah, I think the pain I experienced was building an online school in 2016. It was called Mission U. 1-year alternative to college, graduate high school, go to Mission U, learn data analytics, learn emotional intelligence. We actually did Stanford's touchy-feely class, and it's interpersonal dynamics, but learning emotional intelligence. And in the act of having an entire, what would normally be a brick and mortar experience in a virtual setting, we recognized that was all data. All those conversations were data, but it just wasn't being captured because people weren't recording. And it wasn't being leveraged because recordings are super long and noisy and messy. So we just created our own tools for ourselves in this online school and would make sure that all of our meetings got sent to the right S3 bucket where the right people would have access to manage privacy and security and permissions. And when that school got acquired by WeWork in 2018, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, was to turn that software that we built for ourselves into something that anybody in any team could use for any purpose. And that's really how Grain was born.
And walk us through how it works exactly. So the few of you who are watching the YouTube video, most people listen on the podcast, but the YouTube video is also available. They're going to notice that we have an additional attendee today, the Grain.co call recorder. So explain how it works and what can you do with this after it's been recorded?
Yeah, totally. So one of the core components that we recognized is there's this idea of cognitive load. When you're in a meeting, when you're in a conversation, there's a lot of just is intense custom thinking that ultimately goes on in these settings. And because they're being digitized, being transferred across the internet on virtual platforms, there's an opportunity to leverage the moments of cognition, of thinking. That was an awesome moment. That that moment of customer feedback needs to go to my engineering team. You can get that piece of information as it took place in a conversation and bundle it up and then send it off in the tools where your team already lives. And instead of having to paraphrase and send an email about what someone said, you just clip out the thing that they said or the things that they said, and you can compress, say, hour-long conversation into 3 minutes of a highlight reel, and you get like the Sports Center version of what was said instead of having to rewatch the entire thing, which we all know nobody has the time to do. We all have
Good intentions.
We all have great intentions, but no one has the time. And so what we've done that is unique is recognize that the act of note-taking is actually really important. Is that if you take notes that get timestamped, those become the highest likely indicators of important moments in a meeting. And if you then can pull out those moments and push them into the tools where people need that information, then you've created an entirely new way of distributing that information, doing it now in real time, instead of having to make a note for yourself to go back and to do it later. So we actually reached a really interesting transition point about 2 weeks ago in Grain, where the first year of Grain in the wild was 100% post hoc. So you take the notes in real time, say, that was an important moment. That was awesome. So your notes get timestamps, but it wasn't until after the meeting that you could go back and you could create a highlight clip by selecting the text from the transcript or turning one of your notes into a highlight clip. So now you have the 20 seconds on an independent video link that you can embed in your favorite tools. And so you can say, here's the customer quote. You had to do all of that work afterwards. But about 2 weeks ago, we just launched what we're calling Grain 2.0. And now there's a real-time transcript. There is a real-time highlight clipping. Like you can literally take out something that I just said 20 seconds ago, turn it into a highlight clip by selecting the transcript or just turning your note into a highlight, and then share that right now in real time. Because depending on the meeting type, sometimes we have time to do that work right now. Sometimes we're too busy listening or really involved, and we can do it later. But Grain has that flexibility of being able to move seamlessly across the worlds of synchronous communication and asynchronous communication, be that now or be that after the meeting is over.
I love this. I totally love this. And I like, it sounds like you've also made it really easy to move from synchronous to asynchronous. I mean, that's just something that every team needs to work on doing. I always say we want it to be like Star Trek, right? You want to push a button and be able to
Right.
talk to your team when you need to, but you don't want to be always on. Like that's
Correct.
the balance that you want to be doing. Okay, so what scenarios are people using this with most in terms of meetings? Is it just like capturing meeting notes? Is it for marketing? Give us some case study scenarios.
Yeah, there's a couple of dimensions by which we've found there's properties of conversations. We actually created our internal framework rather than thinking it's for marketers or it's for product managers. We wanted to understand like, well, it's not always for marketers and it's not always for product managers. It's sometimes for each of these different people in these different roles. And so what we identified is there's these properties of conversation where Grain becomes especially useful. And so one of those properties is who is the audience of the content to be consumed after the meeting is over? Is that audience an external one? Like I want to share this content on Twitter, or is this an internal one? Like I want to share those with my team. We've found that the earliest use case of Grain has been a lot more of the internal use case, largely from a privacy consideration. It is super important in Grain. Everything is private by default. You have to intentionally, explicitly share whatever you share. We hook into Zoom. And so you're able to get the consent and recording disclosures that come with Zoom. So that's one of the other benefits of it. So you have that consent and permission. But the audience tends to be people inside of my team. And so the other dimension is, who am I talking to? The people who are actually in this recorded content are those people that are on my team or those people who are outside of my team. And so usually the best match for us is when someone in a company or on a team is talking and having a conversation with a customer, a client, somebody outside of my team, and then with the intention of capturing what they said and then turning it into the important parts and sharing that content with the people inside of my team. You can have people in different permutations across people talking inside of my team in my company. So I might have a team meeting and then I might be sharing that internally inside of my team. Very rarely would I have a team meeting and then turn around and share it publicly. The public sharing tends to happen most for marketing, customer testimonials, and there's an extra layer of consent that's required to be able to get to that public sharing. But that's been the most common use case for us, is talking to someone outside your company, turning around and sharing that content and that information with people inside your company. So that looks like hiring interviews, customer interviews and research. It looks a lot like marketing research as well, academic research. There's a lot of different scenarios where those two variables are kind of in line, and Grain is a perfect fit for those.
I love that because there's a lot of information that people are giving us in conversation that doesn't come across well in text. So, or like
Yeah.
me summarizing the conversation I had with the client is not the same thing as hearing the client's own words, their intonations and everything with it. So the next question then becomes, how do you organize all this information? Like, okay, so you can post it in Slack or whatever tool, Teams, whatever tool
Right.
you're using. I'll just say Slack. Let's just pretend it can be any tool. So you can post it in Slack, but I'm assuming there's some stuff like meeting notes, right? Like where you want things organized in a particular way. How do
Totally.
you go about, like, what recommendations do you have for people who want to build up their information architecture? How do you even do that on a team, really?
Yeah, it's really important to be kind of intentional up front with what you want to do. And so what Grain has done is there's really two main ways of organizing and sharing that information. And so one is being able to break a, a part out of a call as an individual clip. You can think of it as like a Lego building block. And so you've got your individual pieces of Legos. You've got your 4-piece and your 8-piece and your flat. And there's these different types of content that you're pulling out of these recordings. We think of the recordings as like throwaway material. You don't actually want the
Oh,
full recording, generally speaking. It's too busy, it's too noisy, hardly anybody wants
too
that.
long.
It's too long. And so you're creating these individual pieces that you can build something with. And so we actually just built about 2 weeks ago, we released this functionality in Grain called a story. So you can take those individual highlight clips you've made of this 15 seconds where the customer expressed their love for the product in 10 seconds. And then where a different customer from a different call expressed their frustration with the product. And you can categorize and group those by sections into a presentation layer that becomes a multi-clip, almost Instagram story type of experience where I can share a cross section of qualitative feedback if I'm a product manager or user experience researcher, and have this really easy to consume experience on the other end. And that story ends up being kind of like the castle that you made out of the Lego blocks, if you get what I'm saying. And you can reuse those clips in a bunch of different builds. And so if you want to share positive customer feedback or critical customer feedback, or you have a board meeting, for example, before our board meetings, we will always take the voice of the customer and the user, and we'll share that out with the members of the board in advance to say, this is what people are thinking about Grain, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so it is important that there is an intentionality in advance of like, who is the audience? How do I want to use this information? And once you do, and you categorize, you can caption and use a little emojis. So what I do, for example, is I have a little fire emoji that's in the notepad that I use for Grain that adds the timestamps and creates the clips. Every time there's a customer quote that I think is awesome, I throw a little fire emoji on it. And I've actually set up for my own workflow, Zapier workflows, so that within 30 seconds of the customer saying something that I want to share with my team, it automatically triggers the creation of a clip and then the pushing of that clip into a Slack channel. We have a voice of the customer Slack channel, and it just really streamlines that that information sharing. And then later I can recombine those and share it with a different audience as a story.
Amazing. So you've got like a visual audio CMS system in a lot of ways, actually, instead of like, and I remember, what was the tools? It was Salesforce, I think, where you were writing down, it was like an old, like, I don't know if it's a CMS, but it's like a person management system, right? You're doing your leads. So you have to
Right.
write down every interaction that you have with the person.
Right.
In this case, you could just clip all the interactions and then watch it over time, like watch the relationship grow over time. That's kind of
Correct.
amazing.
And it becomes really, sales teams have been adopting Grain for that purpose as well. It becomes really easy to integrate it with your CRM. We don't have direct integrations yet, it's coming, but people can use Zapier, like I mentioned, to where it can push, rather than being like, here's the whole recording. It's like, no salesperson has time to go back and rewatch every interaction. But here are the 5 important interactions that I've had with this client. And now that I'm handing off this account, it becomes really easy to put that new person in the room where it happened as if they were there.
Oh, I really love this. The other thing that it does is it's transcribing as you go, right? So not only do you have video, but it's also transcribing. So you've just got like copying, pasting text if you need to.
Yes.
How tech savvy do you have to be to use this tool?
It's a really good question. And so you don't have to be very tech savvy at all. We tap into the existing behavior of taking notes. So instead of taking notes in Evernote or Apple Notes, you do it in Grain because you get the context of the moment that you took the note. And so that's pretty simple behavior. And then the other thing is, if I'm in a meeting in real time or afterwards where say I didn't take a note and it's like, oh, I want to clip out what was said 30 seconds ago, or at this particular part when I'm watching it later, you simply select the transcript text that you want to turn into a video highlight clip. And then you click a button and it clips it out to the 29 seconds or the 22 seconds. And if you get it wrong, you just adjust the little handles and then it will adjust the clip length accordingly. And what's cool about it is the link stays exactly the same. So that if you shared
Awesome.
that piece of content, say you embedded in a Notion doc of all of your favorite customer clips, or you've shared it in Slack or wherever it may be, then if you change that video later, you are able to keep that exact same link and it'll still propagate through, and the underlying video content on that link will change, but the video link stays the same. So you don't, break that kind of spoken knowledge distribution graph that you've been working on.
So you can like fix it and then the link, whoever clicks on the link, it's already fixed by the time they see it even.
Totally.
So-
There's no like scrubbing audio in Grain at all. You just, okay, those are the words that I want to share. And what's been fascinating for us is a year plus ago when we came up with this mechanism of creating highlights off the transcript for this purpose. We were like, well, what about if there's content on the screen share, or what if like there's a moment of silence? That has turned out to, we have literally gotten 0 customer requests for being able to have more precision than at the word level. For the types of use cases, generally it's
Right.
around what people said. And so if that ties to the transcript with a little bit of buffer, pretty much every time you're going to be able to get the content you're looking for, as opposed to like moments of dead silence. We literally don't have a way for you to edit the video at those points. It's really designed primarily for moments of spoken conversation and knowledge.
Right, just capture. It's not a video editing tool. It's a capturing tool for, right. And indeed, and I would think that it's an awesome way of taking meeting notes, actually. Just an awesome way. So your team having all these clips and sort of notes, you guys must be really good at your online meetings at this point. What are some of the things that you've done to improve? Because right now, Zoom fatigue, we're hearing about people in way too many meetings. What have you guys done to reduce the Zoom fatigue and the number of meetings that you're having?
Totally. A lot of it is cultural. So because we have this culture of openness and transparency, and while meetings are they're private to just the participants who were in it. So say if you miss if you miss a meeting, but Grain culturally is going to record those meetings, you don't have to attend them. You can say, hey, can I get access to that recording later, or proactively, get access. If it's a recurring meeting, you can manage future permissions based on that recurrence of like, always make sure these people get access to the meeting. But that is something that's been really critical for us from a cultural perspective, is the FOMO starts to go away, especially in a remote world. There are no physical walls that you're even missing out on. They're digital walls of meetings that you're not in, where information is super important and critical. So we have a culture to where we default record everything. And so if there is a meeting that doesn't need to necessarily be recorded, I would say one-on-ones, they're the exception to that. If between the manager and the managee, they choose mutually that they want to record, then great. But if it involves more people and it doesn't have an explicitly private component to it, we record every one of those. And then it gives you the ability to choose whether or not you want to attend. Does that actually need my participation? Or am I really there just out of FOMO? Or just like maybe just in case there's information? With a record by default culture, you're able to have more choice over the way you spend your time. And the one other component I would add is that collaborative taking notes and in these annotation moments in Grain is actually a collaborative experience for everybody who is part of your workspace. So you add Grain, Grain is a multiplayer tool by default. It's already set up to be a multiplayer tool. You create a workspace for your team. And as you add people to your team, you can all take notes during a meeting together. So I see your notes, you see my notes. We did not design it explicitly with intention of being these are my private notes.
Mhm.
You could do that. You just have to create a workspace on your own and not add people to it. And then they'd be private notes. But if you add people to your workspace and you're in a meeting with those same people on your team, you're all contributing to the same highlight note timeline. And then that becomes an artifact. It becomes a curated, like I was mentioning, kind of the Sports Center, the Reader's Digest of the meeting that then can get shared with the broader audience of people who weren't even there. And it's more likely to produce something consumable when you're collaboratively taking notes on the same object rather than each independently, which you know you're never going to like bring those notes back together and then distribute them to the people who might need the information.
It's true. I mean, meeting notes has been sort of the bane of many people's existence for years and years. Like, who takes them? What do we do with them? How do we, are they even useful? Does anybody ever look at them? But man,
Yep.
video notes. But okay, so we're coming to the end of our time, but I've got a question about like privacy and security. So technically, it sounds like you've got the privacy, security things worked out. But what about with people? The idea of always being recorded in all of our meetings and like saved forever. I'm sure that there's a little bit of kickback on that. What concerns do you hear about and how do we address those?
Yeah, totally. I think they're very valid concerns. And I think that there is, like any cultural shift, it has to be bottom up. So that's one of the unique things about Grain is that it is an end user tool. We don't go into a company and sell it to the CEO or the VP and then turn it into this surveillance process. We don't believe in that at all. We instead have built a tool for creators who have an intention and a purpose for recording and a purpose for democratizing access to that information. And one of the things that gives the creators confidence is a knowledge that it is private by default. You're not going to accidentally, share information in a candid conversation elsewhere. Frankly, one of the things that it does for our team and for me personally is it just helps me to increase my professionalism. Just like when emails in the early days would just get discarded because there wasn't like memory and storage for them, or IRC messages before Slack. There's a certain amount of recognition that in a professional environment, we should be acting professionally. And so we'll say the things that we would be, okay in general with being more out there, more open. But sometimes we're not at our best self, or sometimes we actually say something the wrong way. And so because Grain is default just to the meeting participants, and it has this sharing mechanism of intention, of sharing just the high signal important parts, there is that comfort of knowing that even if I do misspeak, or even if I do say something, that might be misinterpreted, I'm still in control of the access to that information. So it's really important that this movement towards recording. So Gartner has actually said, they came out in December and their research said that by 2025, which is not that far away, 75% of all meetings at work will be recorded and analyzed.
Wow.
So there's a broader, bigger trend at play. And we believe that it should be a bottoms up, creator focused, anti-surveillance movement that is putting the power in the hands of the actual participants of the call, as opposed to, say, a manager coming over the top and saying, we're recording all of these calls and we'll have access to all of them. That's not how email works either. Like, I don't give access to all of, technically, if I get, fired, someone could get access to my old account, but no one's like in my email seeing all of my emails. The same should be true of my conversations. Like, I don't want to feel like, everyone in the company is going to get access to all of my conversations. I want to feel like I could share all of those conversations, and then I have control over what parts of them get shared, and if they do or not.
I love this. It reminds me of a phrase that I use to describe the ways that remote teams should work. It's called working out loud. We want to make our work observable to others in a way that's useful for people. We don't want to spam people with everything that we're doing, but when we have useful things, we want to be able to easily share it with people. So sadly, we're coming to the end of the time, but a couple last questions. One is, with people who are just starting out with this way of working, what advice would you give for companies who are sort of new to the idea of things going more asynchronous, sending video messages to each other? That's still somehow a new thing. I was telling you before we started recording that Loom, when I send Loom videos to people, it still blows their brains a little bit. And that's like a simple tool that's been around for a while, it feels like. So what do you say to the people who are just starting out with Grain? How would you do it?
Totally. I'm going to answer your question in a slightly weird way, but I'll attach it back. I read a book when I first had a kid called The Whole Brain Child. And I remember when I was just trying to be a brand new dad, and my son was crying, and I was reacting to that in a way where I was like, oh my gosh, like this is making me so angry and me so frustrated. And I read this book, and it talked a lot about intentionality. And it talked about how there's these stimulus and there's this response. And between stimulus and response is the opportunity for intentionality. Is when we're acting and responding amygdalically, we just do whatever the first thing that comes to our brains. And I think that's kind of how we approach meetings a lot of times. We just show up by default and whatever happens, happens. And I believe that one of the mindsets that is going to be really important for improved quality, improved, working out loud as you're describing, and improved democratization is intentionality of saying, before I start this conversation, is who needs access to this information and the results of it? What type of information needs to be documented, captured, and shared? And the more that we approach, especially in a virtual working environment, every conversation with that intentionality, the more likely we are to get the result that we care about. And so tying back to my analogy with my son is, I think about that all the time when he does something or my daughter does something that is making me upset as a parent. I go, wait a second, I'm reacting to this amygdalically. How do I take a step back, pause, and actually respond in a way that's going to get me what I want out of this situation, which is a stronger relationship, which is a feeling of trust. And so while it's a little bit of a silly analogy for the work environment, I think it's very similar, that we have to think about these meetings and saying, what do I want out of it? Because we get so much, it's so easy to complain and moan about all the time we spend in meetings. But when you have more control over your time and your day, and you think about these things intentionally, I think you're much more likely to get what you want. And that's my main piece of advice is look at your calendar and think in advance of like, what do I want to get out of this? And what are the tools? And what's the information what are tools I need to use? And what's the information I need to gather? And who is the audience for that to make sure that I get what I want?
I think that is awesome advice. Here, I'll flash the awesome card. I think it's awesome advice. And actually it reminds me, and Cal Newport's latest book, A World Without Email, he says that we need to replace low effort communication with high quality touch points. And I think that that's the same thing that you're talking about here. We can't just go to meetings, show up, and then just spam whatever we're thinking about. That's low effort, but that's not what we have companies for. We have companies to deliver value. That's what, in that low effort communication, that's not delivering value. High quality touch points is what we're going for. And it sounds like Grain is just the tool to capture those high quality, to touch moments within meetings, actually, so that people can share that. I love this. Thank you so much for your time today. Last question. If people want to find out more about you, what's the best place to look? I'll of course put grain.co in the show notes, but like if they want to reach out to you, Mike, what's the best place to find you?
So I'm just mike@grain.co. I respond to all of my emails that I get, and I'm also pretty available on Twitter. So that's twitter.com/Michael Glenn A. So it's Glenn with one N, MICHAELGLENA.
I'll add that to the show notes as well. Mike, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, until next time, be powerful.